Total war is the complete immersion of society into a war effort. It usually involves conscription, which is military draft, an increase in production, and collectivization, which is where the government goes in and interferes with production. In 1920, Alvaro Obregón took over after Carranza was killed in Mexico. He threatened to take over the U.S. oil field in Mexico. President Coolidge appointed a new U.S. ambassador in Mexico to try and make things a little better. He appointed Dwight Morrow, who was a partner of J.P. Morgan and Company, and the face of American business, essentially. J.P. Morgan and Company was, that is. Morrow changed the name of the American Embassy in Mexico to the United States Embassy, which is a lot less pretentious. America includes all of the countries in North and South America, so to call the United States America kind of discounts the rest of the continents. So it was seen as arrogance. So, and to change it into the United States Embassy was a sign of goodwill. Mexico took control anyway of those oil fields, but returned in 1927, which just proves that you have to give respect to get it. Also, in 1920, women gained suffrage, which is the right to vote. In 1924, the U.S. removed troops from the Dominican Republic. In 1925, the U.S. removed troops from Nicaragua. They were reinstated after a month because of revolutions, but still, we were planning to keep them out, but until the revolutions. In 1927, as I previously said, Mexico returned the U.S. oil fields to the United States that they had taken that were in Mexico. War leads to an increase in production, and when production increases, the economy thrives. Unfortunately, what goes up must come down. At the end of the 1920s, the U.S. encompassed 46% of the global production, 70% of the world's oil supply, 40% of coal production, and only 3% of the population. We were doing pretty well. But in 1929, October of 1929, the stock market crashed. Half of the production income disappeared, which meant that incomes were cut in half, if you were even lucky enough to still have a job. And this led to 25% unemployment. The Hawley-Smoot tariff was a tax on imports, and it was a short-term fix. They were trying to make it so that people bought goods in the U.S. rather than imports, so that it would help with American jobs. However, this decreased the the number of foreign countries buying U.S. goods, and a decrease in trade, which meant that although you're increasing the number of people buying in the U.S., you're also decreasing the people overseas and elsewhere buying the U.S. goods. Secondly, the expansion of business requires investors, but the U.S. investors couldn't afford it, so that cut down on expansion, because now you don't have people in other countries investing in U.S. businesses, and the people in the U.S. were being hit too hard by the Depression to be able to invest in businesses. From 1929 to 1923, President Hoover was in office. He removed the troops, and he also put in the Clark Memorandum, or it occurred under him. J. Reuben Clark was then Undersecretary of State, and he issued this memorandum. It repudiates, which means detest or oppose, the Roosevelt Corollary, which basically meant that we wouldn't do that anymore. The Roosevelt Corollary pretty much said that we could go and interfere with any business in the Americas that we wanted to. In 1933, the Platt Amendment was nullified. It said that we could intervene at any time in Cuba, so now that it's nullified, we could not. In December of 1933, Cordell Hull, who was the Secretary of State, attended and gave a speech at the 7th Pan-American Conference. He said that no state has the right to intervene in the affairs of another, which is what the U.S. had been doing for many, many years, so he was it was like an apology for doing it, I suppose. In 1934, the troops were out of all of Latin America except for Guantanamo Bay and the Panama Canal. In 1936, in June, the Buenos Aires Conference was held. In 1938, Mexico took back the oil fields, but Roosevelt refused to go in and take them, which is just par for the course. In 1939, World War II began, and in December of 1941, Japan bombed Pearl Harbor. Japan and Germany were allies, but the U.S. focused on Germany because our European allies were weak. So if they were taken over, the U.S. would be alone. And Japan is a little ways away, so they were less of a threat. Latin American countries were loyal to and cooperative with the U.S. during World War II.